like to come around and stand over here, that's fine. And chairs if someone would like to sit down. It gets to be kind of a long walk.
Mayor, you got any booze up there?
After a while, you could.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. It's good for me to harangue an Elgin crowd again. Many is the time I stood at the factory gates, talked to shoe workers, watch workers, shirt factory workers, condensed milk factory workers. They're the ones who are my friends. My name's ARWIN Price, working man's friend here in Elgin for many years. Why was I the working man's friend? Because I was a working man myself, had calloused hands all the time I was in City Hall. Born and raised in Wisconsin, was apprenticed to a stone cutter before the age of 12. My wife and I came to Elgin in 1869, and we were both 19 years of age. I worked at a stone cutting establishment down on South Grove. Eventually, I had my own shop, and my last stop was Elgin Marble and Granite Works. You see over there as the grand newly opened. I sold that out in 1903. Many of the monuments you see in this cemetery, which I dedicated as mayor in 1889, I carved. Of course, I didn't carve them here. Most of them were carved for the cemetery down in Channing Street, and then they were moved here when the new cemetery was opened. But I suppose people mostly would remember me as a politician. Politics to me is an honorable profession. Politics is decision-making. Somebody has to make the decision. And always, there are people who do not like the decision. And so they take it out on the politicians. But a fellow named Alft, who had nothing better to do, counted up the number of times I appeared on the ballot in this community. 27 times. From when I first ran for office as alderman in the 3rd Ward in 1874 to my last hurrah as a candidate for mayor in 1927. Mrs. Price and I came to this town when it was simply a rough, rural marketing community. No paved streets, no waterworks, no professional fire department, no professional police department. And we saw it grow into a modern industrial city. When I left City Hall in 1923, every one of our fire stations was motorized. We had a waterworks. I was the alderman who introduced the resolution establishing the public waterworks in this community in 1887. I was an alderman when I first became mayor in 1889. This is because Mayor Vin Lovell resigned. He couldn't understand why the alderman didn't do as he wanted him to do. It took a stone cutter, a man of the people, to ride rough herd on those aldermen and get something done down there at City Hall. There are a lot of things to do in this community besides the waterworks. While I was mayor, we established 3 miles of brick paving, took Elgin out of the mud downtown. We told the utilities, get those wires and poles out of the downtown area, and they finally did. When the swells, the wealthy people in town, who sent their kids to the Elgin Academy, established a country club. I said to the working people in this community, you elect me mayor, and we're going to have a golf course for the working man. Many of you have played Wing Park. It was the first publicly owned golf course in the state of Illinois. I was glad to open it up in 1980. But there are those who wanted to take advantage of one of my failings. One time Abe Lincoln was on a stagecoach with a stranger who offered him a chaw of tobacco. Abe said, no thank you, I don't chew. A while later, the stranger offered him a swig from his bottle. Abe said, no thank you, I don't drink. The stranger said, well, it's always seemed to me that a man who has no vices has damn few virtues. And I would like to say I have a few virtues. But one of the vices, apparently, according to the Courier and the News, was that I would take a nip occasionally. There was a time, for example, when I was up there at the River Street Saloons in East Dundee, coming back on that interurban trolley, somewhat disheveled and blurry-eyed, A church lady stood over me and said, "Mayor Price, aren't you ashamed that someone in your official position could be seen in such a state?" I said, "Madam, it is true I am somewhat under the weather, but tomorrow morning down at City Hall I will be cold sober. On the other hand, you, madam, are a damn fool now, and tomorrow morning you'll still be a damn fool." One time a heckler got to me down in Fountain Square. He said, "Price, you're a drunk." I said, "Sir, that is true. But I would be a better mayor drunk than my opponent sober, and you can believe it." One time we had a kind of benefit for Davy Walker at Lord's Park. He was the custodian, taught the bears a few tricks, would go into the cage with him for the kids. He was going back home to Scotland for a visit, and we were paying his passage out of this festival. I was assigned to the pop bottle concession. It bothered me that people would be walking by and not buying a bottle of pop. And Davy and I had been out the night before, well, the morning of the festivity. And so I took to throwing pop bottles at the ones who didn't buy. But when one of my political opponents went by, I couldn't help myself. I took a whole 24-bottle case and heaved it at him. It was in the papers next day, "Mayor on jag again," picked up by the Chicago papers. It disturbed me a little, because always the Courier was focusing on this one little failing, never bothered to mention my services to the city of Elgin. So I thought I'd go down and have a little talk with the editor. By a mistake, I grabbed E.J. Real Estate Roach and banged his head against the wall a few times. He said, "Mayor, I'm not the editor, I'm real estate." I said, "Oh, hell, real estate, I'm sorry about this. Wouldn't have known, I thought you were the editor." He says, "Think nothing of it, Mayor. I can always use the publicity." Well, my home apparently is for sale down on East Chicago Street, 470 East Chicago Street. I carved the marble fireplace downstairs and the marble fireplace upstairs. I laid the marble floor in the vestibule. Wife and I lived there from 1888 until my death in 1933. They tell me this, I can't remember it myself, but I never did learn to drive a car, and I would take the streetcar that ran up the Chicago Street Hill down at City Hall, and it came right by my house. Well, apparently, one afternoon, I was relieving myself out of the back end of the car. Now, you think this is shocking. And the local papers never printed, of course, anything good that I did. It took the Batavia Herald to say something nice about ARWIN Price. If Mayor Price takes a nip too much occasionally, he is as honest as the day is long. Elgin would rather have a drunkard for a mayor than a thief. That was me. For the 12 years I served as mayor of this community, I would take a nip occasionally, but I never took a dime that didn't belong to me. And money was coming in and out of that city hall to pay for all these improvements. The cemetery, the brick paving, the waterworks, the artesian well system. But Mayor Price never took anything. Now, of course, look at my Elgin here, and I see you people have to be getting on. But I would like to call your attention to the fact that there's an election coming up in November, and I hope you'll all vote. Remember me when you do, the people's friend.
Howdy! Howdy, folks. Good to see you're here. I'm even more glad to be here myself. I've been waiting here to have a chance to speak to you folks for a long time. Since 1901. Been right here. John Manley Adams is my name. I call myself a photographer. Was a photographer for a long time before '01. My folks came to here, came to Elgin. Mother and father brought me here in 1833. Brought me down here from Canada. Dad was a shoemaker, and he thought that Elgin would be a fair city to conduct his business in, and he did so until he died. Provided a good living for me and Mom. Well, I got married just after I got out of high school. I went to Elgin High School until I was 16, but I kind of give up on it. You know, it wasn't the most interesting thing to do. So I got a job making mattresses, didn't like that too much. Took a job plastering, didn't like that much either. But then I got a job as a butcher. Now that was a pretty good job. I made good money. But there was just something that kept tickling me. You know, I'd read the newspaper accounts of the Civil War in about 60, 61, and I heard about this fella called Matthew Brady. He was the photographer that made life very, very interesting for a lot of people because he took pictures and was able to show people pictures of the way things were where they weren't. And I thought that was wonderful, and I wanted to do it. So, went out, got myself a camera, became a photographer, taught myself how to work it, and used my instincts on how to take pictures. Took pictures of buildings and the people in them. By '64, I had myself a studio right over there on the north side of Chicago Street, right on the east side of the Fox River. Now that was at the end of that old wooden bridge. We had a wooden bridge there then. I don't know what you have now. And a dirt street that come down this way and then run up the hill. And we had wood sidewalks up and down both sides. Well, one morning, it was in '65, I think it was. It was pretty cold out there. I was in the back room of the shop. I was having a cup of coffee to warm up, thinking about my appointments for the day, when I heard a hell of a noise out there. I can't tell you what it sounded like now, but it was a long time ago, and it was loud. I heard a stomping and a noise and a great big thunder, and then all of a sudden a whole bunch of wailing. Well, I rushed out the front door of the shop, and I look over there towards the river, and I saw about 40 or 50 cows swimming around in the water with the remains of what used to be the wooden bridge in the water there too. Well, a bunch of fellas come out of the other shop. We got a bunch of ropes, and we went down and commenced to tying up those that were trying to get away and herding up the rest of them that got up onto the shore by themselves. And old farmer come over to me crying and moaning about what am I going to do with all these things, these cows that they can't walk anymore. And I said, well, I used to be a butcher. Why don't we show the rest of these fellas how to do the trick? And we did. We butchered about a dozen of those cows right there, and then I took pictures of the whole mess. Had a lot of fun here in Elgin. A lot of good times, took a lot of nice pictures, and we had a lot of good memories. When I think back, probably, oh, excuse me, Maddie Kingsley, my daughter, is around here somewhere, and I want to be respectful. When I think back, I remember my children and my son Pent, that was Spencer, who followed in my footsteps as a photographer. He was a good photographer, a photographer of portraiture, more so than myself, who enjoyed taking pictures of the buildings and the people associated with them in Elgin. I remember that when I was here and began taking pictures, this little town was about 2,500 people. By the time I died in 1901, we had over 20,000 citizens in this great city. I took pictures of the people that were building the buildings, and hardly a day went by that there wasn't a new one coming up or an old one being torn down and another one built in its place. I took pictures of the people who worked on them, the people who worked in them, the people who passed by and who shopped in the shops, and it was a very, very satisfying life to lead. When I think back, though, on the meaning of it all, I think that the thing that satisfies me most is that in my 40 years as a photographer of Elgin, I took a lot of wonderful, wonderful photographs. And the best part about it is that you folks here, 100 years later, can see Elgin exactly as I saw it. You can see it to the T, right through the lens of the camera. Many of you, I hope, had the chance to see some of my work on display here as you waited in line, I hope not too long. And those of you who missed it, please look when you leave and see some of the photographs I took. And for those of you who want to see more, go on down to the Old Main Museum and talk to Clarence Reber, and he'll show you some more of my work and my son Pent's work. Now, so that we can continue the tradition of recapturing the great moments in Elgin's history for film, I want all of you to give me your best smile. When I count 3, I want you to say something like, Borden's condensed milk. 1, 2, 3. Yes, okay, we got it. Thank you very much, folks, for coming, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Very good.
By the shores of Gitche-Gumee, by the big sea shining water, stood a wigwam of Nokomis, daughter of the moon. The opening line from Longfellow's epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha. And my name is Maude PARLASCA, but I'll let you call me Maude. This is my final resting place, along with my beloved husband, Carl. And what we did for a living and where we were born and how we got to Elgin is almost inconsequential in the whole scope of things. So if you really want to know those things, you can read your program. But the most important thing about my life and my husband's was what we were interested in and what we did with our lives. We shared a most incredible love and interest in travel and in our Native American brothers and sisters, the American Indian. Every summer we would travel west and we would visit with Indians on different reservations, and we would sit at their feet and learn about Indian lore and legend and song, and most importantly, my husband, Carl, Par, learned Indian dances, authentic Indian dances. We came back to Elgin and we had no children, so we had this need to share our information with someone. I was a teacher. I taught at Elgin High School in home economics, and so they were sort of my children, but Par worked with the Boy Scouts here in Elgin, and he had a need to teach them about everything he knew. And one summer he had this great idea. It was July 27th, 1927 to be exact. He took his favorite poem, The Song of Hiawatha, took a group of Boy Scouts, gathered them around a campfire, and in a very modest way decided to act out the Song of Hiawatha using these boys and all the Indian dances he had learned by our travels out west. Well, it was great. It was wonderful. The boys enjoyed every minute of it. The only problem, of course, was they had to play all the parts, including Minnehaha, Laughing Water, and all the Indian maidens. They were not pleased. So the next year I decided, since they liked us so much, that I would kind of lend my helping hand. And I became the original Old Nokomis. And for 20 years I played that role. And for 20 years, from 1928 to 1948, I was the only woman in that pageant. Well, what started as a very small, modest acting out of this poem around a campfire became quite big. More people were interested in being involved. We invited audiences after a while, and before you knew it, we had on our hands quite a spectacle. And if any of you are Elginites, old Elginites, you probably spent quite a few summers yourself out there watching what became very special to this town and to everyone who was involved in it. We opened it up to people in the community, girls, which made the boys very happy. But they had to do strict auditions, for Par was very select as to who he chose to be part of this group. He didn't want anyone misrepresenting the American Indian in any way, shape, or form. So there were strenuous auditions. And you had to prove to Par that you could be a very good representative of the American Indian. But he rewarded you by giving you an Indian name. just as we were given Indian names when we were initiated in several tribes out west by our friends. My Indian name was Wawakiwin, which means helping woman, and I truly was Par's helper, but it was his brainchild, the pageant. Every year as the pageant grew, we still traveled out west just to kind of refresh ourselves and to see our friends, to learn new stories. In 1954, we traveled like we always did. Got as far as Colorado, visited some friends, and I had a stroke and died at Kit Carson Memorial Hospital in 1954. Burlington, Colorado. It was where I think if I had my choice, I would have died. Pa lived on for 27 more years, and what made him continue was he had a goal in mind. He wanted to make this Indian pageant the best ever, world renowned, and it became world renowned. He took a group of Boy Scouts and young people to France for French Jubilee, part of the American Indian Jubilee. He took a group of dancers, as they were the only Indian dance troupe that were invited to dance in the Orange Bowl parade. They were invited everywhere, all over the country, as true representatives of the American Indian. Par died in 1980, but before he died, he had put 51 years into the Song If You Want the Pageant, reading from his original poem. First, he started over a megaphone when it first started, and of course then it got to be so he could use a microphone sitting in a big tower out of Camp Timber. Before he died in 1978, the city of Elgin bestowed a great honor upon myself and him by giving to the city a display, the MAUDE PARLASCA and PARLASCA display. And in that display was actually some of the costumes that were originally worn in the pageant, some jewelry and some books and some other kinds of artifacts that were kind of important to me and to Carl. Now this display is over at the Old Main Historical Museum, and you can see it. And in there is the original dress that I wore as old and comas. If Par had an effect on anyone, it was to teach them the ways of the American Indian, the ways of nature. And if I could leave you with anything this afternoon, I'd like to leave you with this quote. It was by Chief Seattle in 1855. It kind of sums up how Par felt about the earth and about the people that lived on the earth. The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood which unites us all. So with that, I bid you adieu. Walk softly. You're in a sacred ground.
Linda told me that somebody had trouble with this hill down here.
Did you have your picture taken and say Elgin condensed milk? Did you say that? Good. Makes me smile too. Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and children. It's my pleasure to be here with you today and to share part of my life story with you. My name is EMELINE Eunice Eno Church Borden. Quite a mouthful. I was born in Colebrook Center, Connecticut on July 26, 1808. My story today begins with my marriage to my first husband, Hiram Church, who is buried here next to me. Hiram was a pelt trader who had settled in the Fox Valley area. I met him actually in Connecticut. That's where we married, settled down for a few years, and had two sons, Alfred and Samuel. We eventually moved back to the Elgin area and lived here until Hiram died. At that point, I moved back to Connecticut. It was back in Connecticut that I met my second husband, Gail Borden. Gail and I were married on August 15, 1860. Little is known of our courtship, and I actually prefer that because those memories are very personal. I can say that I did bring a business head with me to the altar. On the day of our marriage, Gail signed a prenuptial contract guaranteeing me $350 a year for the duration of my marriage, which was quite a bit of money in those days. I do want to comment on Gail's relationship to my sons. Although he had 7 children of his own, 2 did die in childhood, however, he showed genuine affection to my 2 boys. He later gave them responsible positions in his company and made Alfred co-executor of his estate. Gail was a man of many talents. Although he had very little education, he accomplished much. And that's what I'd like to tell you about today. I could spend the whole afternoon telling you stories about this amazing man, but I think I'll just highlight a few events since I know you have other places to visit. Gail was born in New York in 1801. In 1829, he moved to Texas. He married his first wife and moved to Texas, where he certainly left his mark. He, along with several men, including Sam Houston, James Bowie, and Stephen Austin, helped frame the Texas Constitution. He published the first permanent newspaper in Texas and helped to found Baylor University. While in Texas, he worked on many inventions. He designed a Lazy Susan table for his second wife. He invented an amphibious machine that could travel on land and water. And he invented the meat biscuit, which was a combination of flour and beef extract that would not spoil. Some people thought he was a genius, others considered him peculiar. But most people liked him in spite of his idiosyncrasies. As I said, Gail and I were married in 1860. At that time, he was very involved in the production of condensed milk. He had spent 7 long years trying to develop a process for preserving milk, and in 1856 he did so. And the process involved boiling water out of milk and adding sugar. There was a real need for condensed milk during the Civil War, and after the war the need continued. Many families moved into the city as industrialization increased. Very few people in the city had access to fresh milk, and those that did had no way of keeping it safe, so condensed milk was the answer. By 1889, he developed the milk, and as the need continued, he realized he needed some more plants. It was I who suggested to him that he think of the Fox Valley area for a new plant. I told him of the rolling hills and the fresh springs in the Elgin area. It sounded to him like the dairying spot in the west that he'd been looking for, so he came to Illinois, looked the area over, and decided, yes, indeed, it was the right spot. In 1865, he opened the Elgin Milk Condensing Plant. But in the following year, 1866, it was in full operation, producing condensed milk, cheese, and meat biscuits. Gail was very particular about the quality of the farms that supplied his milk, and because of this, his milk gained a reputation as being the highest quality, uniform, and very suitable for children. The plant, by the way, was located on the corner of Brook and Water Streets, and it still stands today. It's across the street from the police station. It's in the process right now of being granted an Illinois State Historical Marker. By 1889, Elgin milk was being sold worldwide. We built a beautiful home at 60 Division Street. Unfortunately, Gail never got to see it. He died before he was able to move in. He died in Borden, Texas in 1874 of pneumonia. As for me, I lived to a ripe age of 81 years and 6 months. I lived in our wonderful home to my death. I developed an illness due to a severe cold, which I still have today, and died after a week's illness. My obituary was a very kind one, mentioning my generosity to the poor and deserving. I'm very proud of Gail and what he accomplished. He left a real impact on the city of Elgin, and it was because of the Elgin Milk Condensing Company. That was one of the key factors that made Elgin the dairying center. He, along the way, however, had some failures and frustrations. If there's any main point we would like to leave, he and I leave with you today, would be summed up in his 2-line epitaph, which reads, "I tried and failed, I tried again and again, and succeeded. A lesson worth contemplating, don't you think? Thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Charles B. Stiles. I was born here in Elgin in 1844. My parents, Luther and Sarah Stiles, had moved to Elgin. Just prior to that, they'd come from New York. My father was in the agricultural implement business, and so I helped him out with that business for a number of years. Well, in 1861, there was a little rebellion here in the United States. A call went out for volunteers. And here in Elgin, a company formed. It was commanded by a Colonel Grizel, and his second in command was Lieutenant Colonel Joslin. I don't know if any of you had ever met Colonel Joslin, but he was a wonderful, wonderful man. You might have met him a couple of years ago. I was a little young. I was only 17 at the time, weighed 105 pounds. Well, I was a real scrapper. But I could get in as a drummer boy. Now, at that time, commands were given by sound. And so it was very, very important that the person be able to play the drum well and give the commands to the troops with the sound. So I practiced a lot, but I also was involved with cooking. I mean, you had to feed the men. Also, with the hospital, we had to take care of the men if they were hurt. So there were a lot of duties that I had as a volunteer. Well, we spent time in Missouri and worked our way on to Atlanta. And during the battles or after the battles, one of my duties was to go out and to look for wounded. Well, it was rather grisly. In fact, many times in a diary that I kept, I wrote how miserable and terrifying war was. We would go out on the battlefield and we could tell the dead from the near dead just by the maggots. The dead had maggots, the alive, those that were still alive didn't. Well, it was part of my job. That's something that I did. But on June 1st, 1864, a friend of mine came into the medical tent. A fellow Elginite by the name of Walter Ordway. Now, Walter had been hit in the shoulder. The bullet had passed through. But it had been so bad that the doctors decided to amputate his arm. So they did. I visited Walter a lot. On June 12th, I went to visit Walter and he told me how bad the pain was. And 20 minutes later, Walter died. Well, I buried Walter. I dug a shallow grave so that his body could be retrieved later and sent home here to Elgin. But after that, it just didn't see the same. So in September of that year, my 3 years were up and I was discharged in Atlanta and I worked my way home. When I got home, I got involved with the beginning of a company here in Elgin called the Elgin Watch Company. And we were going to build a new building, and I'm proud to say I drove the first stake to mark out where that building was going to be built. Spent a number of years working for the Elgin Watch Company as a machinist and then as a draftsman. Went to work in Springfield for a company called the Springfield Watch Factory, and also was a draftsman with A.B. Dick in Chicago for quite a while. But it was during that time that I met and married my wonderful wife, Nellie. We had two beautiful children, Mabel and Emma. Now, Mabel was a teacher, and she attended a little school west of here that just got started. It was called the DeKalb Normal School. I don't know if that school's still around anymore. But she graduated from there. Well, when the kids were grown, Nellie and I were still very interested in children. She was always trying to find homes for kids that didn't have homes. And I got involved with something called the YMCA. Trying to get a YMCA started here in town. And we were successful in that. And Nellie was always trying to find homes for these kids. So we felt pretty good about that. I also belonged to an organization called the GAR, Grand Army of the Republic. It was for veterans of the war between the states. It got sadder and sadder to belong to that organization because more and more of my comrades, the older we got, the more comrades we lost. The whole purpose of the organization was to keep from forgetting what happened in that terrible war, as if we ever could forget. Well, I passed away in 1919, which was real interesting because it was 100 years after my dad was born. Exactly 100 years. Ellie and I are laid to rest here, and it's interesting that we're right next to Potter's Field. Potter's Field is where people are buried who have no friends, who have no family, who have no resources. Kind of like the people that Nellie worked with trying to find homes for. And so the people that she cared about the most, we end up resting with. Well, thank you very much. You have some beautiful weather.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello. Hi.
This is not the gravesite of Richard Jacobs. He's actually buried along with his family on lot 17, which is further down Dell. So when you're done, if you're interested in seeing his gravesite, you'll see a marker just like the flowers and the ribbons that are displayed here, right by where his grave is. My name is Richard Jacobs. I'm better known to my family and friends as Dick. I was born November 21st, 1921. I was Elgin's first casualty in World War II. But I'll talk more about that later. I'd like to tell you about myself and my family, who meant an awful lot to me. My parents, Willis Jacobs and the former Louise Andresen, had a daughter and 4 sons. My sister Marion, who was the oldest, she died when she was 21 of injuries from a swimming accident while in Lake Geneva. My 3 brothers, Frank, George, and Willis, still live in the area. You know, when I was really young, I always knew I wanted to be in the Navy. We had a neighbor. His name was Al Berg. He was a naval veteran. He would often tell us stories about the Navy and his travels around the world. And that's where I learned about the expression, join the Navy and see the world. Well, when I attended Garfield Grade School, I would often join the Navy and see the world. In my dreams. Daydreams, actually. As I recall, I even got in trouble a few times for it. Well, as I got a little bit older, Navy was always still number 1. But like all young men, I had a favorite hangout. It was the Bungie Sinclair Station, right on the corner of St. Charles and Bluff City, right down the street. It was run by Hugh. Well, I spent a lot of time there. I helped him out quite a bit, and we became very close friends. When he had his 2nd son, he named him Dick. Word has it that he named him in my honor, in my memory. And if that's true, I'm extremely honored for that he would think that highly of me to name one of his sons in my memory. Well, I attended Elgin High School, and I was active in athletics. They had football teams, and they had them by weight divisions, but even still, because of my slender build, I felt I was better suited for basketball. Say, tell me, what's this I hear about this Jordan fella? Can he really fly? And I hear he also has a problem with his tongue. Well, anyway, I really enjoyed singing, and I performed in musicals while I was in school. And you know, I often thought that Navy weren't always number 1 to me. Had I pursued a career in music, people might be saying my name instead of that Frank fella. Who knows? Well, I graduated from Elgin High School in January of 1940. On January 9th of 1940, I enlisted in the Navy. And I went to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center. And my family, of course, saw me off. And I was to find out later in a letter that my father really had second thoughts about that. As a matter of fact, when they stopped to gas up or whatever it was, he was saying, you know, I just have an awful feeling about Dick going in the Navy. I think maybe I shouldn't have let him go. But then at the same time, in the same breath, he said, but Dick always did what he wanted to do. And you know what? My dad knew me very well. I always did. Well, I graduated from basic training, and I was stationed in the Pacific Fleet in the Hawaiian waters aboard the USS California. I was a ship fitter, third-class petty officer, and one of my responsibilities was making sure that the hatches were closed in the event of emergencies. I'll never forget how proud I was that Saturday, December 6, 1941. Well, I sang with a trio, and we were in a contest representing the California on shore at a dance. It was attended to by the Admiral of the Navy, Admiral Kimmel, and the Commanding General of the Army for the Pacific Department, General Short. We won first prize. Well, part of our reward is our ship was able to sleep in the next morning. That next morning was the infamous day, December 7th, 1941. It's when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. At 0800 marked the beginning of the end for 6 officers and 92 enlisted men. The California took 2 torpedo hits and hit below the armor belt. 20 minutes later, after several bomb hits, the anti-aircraft ammunition exploded. And it ruptured the bow plates, and that's when we perished. In the period of 110 minutes, more than 2,400 Americans died. Another 1,200 were wounded as a result of the massive Japanese air attack that was conceived by Admiral Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the combined Japanese fleet. 5 battleships were either sunk or disabled. Another 3 were damaged. Pearl Harbor was a nightmare of flame and smoke. On December 16, 1941, my family was informed that I met my death. And a notation from the Rear Admiral C.W. Nemitz, Chief of the Bureau of Navigation, United States Navy in Washington, he said that I died. But he said that I died by doing my duty for the service of my country. The day before, my parents got the Christmas card that I sent them and mailed on December the 4th. Today, 1 battleship still remains in Pearl Harbor. It rests at the bottom, but continues to proudly wave Old Glory. That means the USS Arizona is still a commissioned vessel of the United States Navy. Inside that vessel lie the bodies of 1,102 men who were trapped when the Arizona sank within 9 minutes of the attack from the Japanese. Well, I'm proud to say that today there's a Richard F. Jacobs, Chapter 54 of the Disabled American Veterans, that works to gather information and help the veterans and their families to gather information and records so that they may receive the benefits that they so rightly deserve. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to see how many of you have come out to learn more about Elgin history today, because I've always been very interested in Elgin myself. And I felt that if people wanted to live in a wholesome community, they should do what they could to make that community a better place in which to live. And during my lifetime, I did what I could for Elgin, and as a result, my years were rich and fulfilling. My name is LIBBIE GOLL, and I was born in Wittenberg, Germany in 1876. When I was 4 years old, the family moved to the United States and settled here in Elgin. With 5 brothers and 3 sisters, we made a large family. But I lived to be the oldest of all of the children, and I was 74 when I died in 1951. I would like to read to you from a poem Mrs. Virginia Porter wrote about me. It's somewhat embarrassing to read a poem that is so flattering, but she does mention many of the things that were very important to my philosophy. It's called A Tribute to LIBBIE GOLL. A vision once came to a lady while she pondered as some often do, of how she could help the poor needy, even though she could help just a few. She thought of the destitute people, of the sick who were needing a rest, and she said to herself, I must help them. I wonder just how would be best. She started a miniature haven for a few who were longing for care. She dealt with them kindly and gently. To many, such kindness was rare. This haven of rest soon grew larger as more people came, not in vain, to ask if they too could be sheltered. Some perhaps, though their lifetime remained. Time passed and Rest Haven expanded, for it grew a bit more every year, and now it's a grand institution and a home that so many hold dear. She sacrificed much of life's pleasures to make life more tolerable here for those who were needing her kindness, her love, and her comfort and cheer. Yes, others have shared in the service, many relatives, helpers, and all, but the one who has shouldered the burden is our own dear Miss LIBBIE GOLL. Her standby has long been Miss Minnie, a helper indeed she has been. It seems that she always is needed and knows just the place to step in. May Rest Haven long spread its beacon of comfort and help to distress. May it long be a stronghold and refuge where the weary will always find rest. I began Rest Haven when I was 30 years old in partnership with Rose McEwen. We bought the Lovell Estate, which was a single-family house that had been built in 1880. It was a large estate on the corner of Liberty and Villa Streets. We opened as a 6-bed psychiatric hospital, one of only 4 in the state of Illinois. We accepted psychiatric, convalescing, and chronically ill patients. And our philosophy was that each person should be treated with kindness, patience, and dignity that they deserve because they are human beings. Our establishment grew quickly. By 1916, we needed a 2-story addition. In a few years, 1923, we added a 3rd story, and in 1936, we added a 3rd building. By then, I had bought out Rose McEwen's share, and we had grown to a 100-bed facility. As busy as we were, I still insisted that each of my staff treat every patient with tolerance, with kindness, with patience, and with dignity. They knew I was an exacting person, but I was quick to praise, and they liked their jobs and knew I was a fair employer. We had many busy years. The Depression was an especially busy time because our kitchen opened its doors to needy people in the community. Our kitchen had a fine reputation because I insisted that good nutrition was an important part of patient care. And along with a balanced diet, the food was also very tasty, and we could help those with special dietary needs. During those Depression years, I often sent bags of groceries, clothing, toys to families who were in need. I did try to keep this activity secret, but the need was very great. Luckily, during these years, I wasn't working alone. Early, Mrs. Alma Woolbusser had been a great help, and in the later years, my niece, Minnie Gull, was an invaluable aid. When I came back to Elgin today, I discovered that Rest Haven had been closed 20 years after my death. Then it had opened shortly as a retirement community. Then in 1980, it was renamed Levelton and opened its doors to those with drug and alcohol problems. I'm glad that Elgin continues the tradition of caring for those in need. It's what has made it a fine community and a good place to live. Thank you for stopping by today to learn more about our history.
This is my father-in-law. This is my mother-in-law. This is one of my husband's aunts. Libby Gall was my husband's aunt, and I've been in that place many times. She was wonderful to us. When my husband was in the Second World War, she had me come up and gave me enough money for my train ticket, which wasn't much in 1944.
But she cared.
She cared. She was wonderful to us.
That's what so many people
And
have
Minnie
told me.
came to my house many times.
Oh, you're lucky to have known her.
Oh yeah, she had polio and was very crippled. Minnie was.
Oh yeah?
That was my husband's father's sister. It was
Wow.
5 of them, yeah.
Well, Minnie lived a long time.
Yes, she did. She lived for 1972. And this is one of my sons. I have
Aunt
3.
Libby bought all these stones.
Every one of these stones, you notice they're all
the
dates.
same.
Yeah.
This is the only one that got lost.
I know that one just died.
Grandma died in 1985 and her stone just disappeared. Nobody knew where it was stored, so we had to have a new one made for her. The rest of these have all been in storage, and as people died, they were brought out of storage.
She bought them.
Maybe you can answer a question for me.
Sure.
Where did Libby get her original money to start Rest Haven? Nobody knows.
Yeah, we know as a
We
family.
think.
Back during Prohibition, Al Capone was very big in her life.
We don't know. It's nothing I can prove, and I don't want to, but so I won't. I don't know where would she have to say so.
And if I say something you don't catch, just raise your hand. I'll be happy to repeat it. My name is James Hanks, and I was born in 1810 near a small town in New York State. It was called Bath. The town was B-A-T-H. I died in the Elgin area here in 1838, so I only lived to be 28 years old. The reason I'm being brought back from the dead today is that I was actually the first permanent white settler in this area. Compared to me, the Giffords are newcomers. I was just about ready to do some chores here in chopping wood, and that's really where my story begins, only out in New York State on my dad's farm. One day I looked up and I saw this man coming in on horseback. I could see he traveled quite a distance, so I asked him if he wanted to stop and water his horse and grab a bite to eat. He said he'd be mighty obliged to. So he came in and we sat down and started talking, and he said he was from the Illinois Territory. Him and his brother had just got done fighting the Indians in the Black Hawk War. His brother died, and since the next of kin for him was his sister out in New York City, he was going out to visit her and possibly get a job working in the railroad with his brother-in-law. Well, I was more interested in this Illinois Territory we had just won from the Indians. And he started to tell me about this land, how nice it was with the rolling meadows and hardwood trees and clear streams and rivers. So, being a man of 23 at the time, I started thinking I'd like to have my own farm. So after the man left, I talked to my father about it, and sure enough, in spring of 1834, I packed up my horse with a few of my tools and some cold cash and came out to this northwest Illinois Territory. I found what I thought was the best piece of farmland anyone could have. As near as we can recollect, I started my farm in the area right along Poplar Creek, which is very close to where Elgin High's football field would be today. When I got there, of course, there were trees and I had to plow up the land and do all this by hand, but the first thing I had to do was to build myself a shelter. In that spring, by the summer, I'd got a one-room shack up, and I'd mainly lived off what I could hunt and fish. And once I had gotten settled, well, I went into the nearby Chicago to some of the farmers, and I bought some seed off them. And I came out, and I started to plow up a field by hand. It was then that I realized just how rich this soil actually was here.
now I say a field, we're probably talking about 1/4 of an acre we expect, that I probably got in the first year. I started to correspond with my father from Chicago to New York through the mail, and through my letters he was enticed to put the family farm in New York up for sale. And after he had sold it a year and a half later, why, the rest of the family came out to join me. And with the money that he had from the farm, well, we were able to establish a permanent residence and a permanent farm, the first one in the Elgin area. The following year, he was so happy that he started to correspond with some of his friends out in New York, one of them by the name of A.D. Gifford. And the following year, in 1837, Gifford came out and started his farm. From then on, we had brought droves of settlers within the next 10 years from the state of New York to the Elgin area to where this permanent settlement will begin. Now, I don't know too much happened after that because I died in 1838 at the young age of 28. I was never married, and we think that I was probably buried on my farm, and then as Elgin grew a little older, my body was transported to the Elgin Cemetery where Channing Park is today. And then in 1911, they dug up my body again, and they brought it out here to Bluff City. Now, I don't have a marker, but we believe that my body is somewhere within about this 20-foot circle radius here that we have, and there's even some discrepancy today on which side of the mausoleum I'm on. So we're not quite sure. The importance of it is that I was the very first white settler, and that I brought many more and from New York to settle permanently here, and it will start the town of Elgin. I know you've had a long day and you got a hill to walk. I hope you enjoyed yourself. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Now, what was your name again, please?
James Hanks.
How do you
James
spell
Hanks.
that?
H-A-N-K-S.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Hanks.
No.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed.